Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Melbourne is a city known for its trams, having the largest tram network in the entire world. It's also the only remaining tram network in all of Australia which retains most of its lines from when it was originally built in the late 1800s and early 1900s. However, there were a few more tram networks that almost survived, and one in particular that has great potential to return in the future, and that city might be a little closer to home than you'd expect. This is the story of the Bendigo trams, and why I think they should return as a public transport service for good. Also, before we get into things, my channel is currently in a subscriber race with the entire country of Tuvalu. I'm trying to overtake the entire population of Tuvalu by the end of the year, so if you could subscribe, that would be a huge help, and we can finally defeat this tiny Pacific Island country once and for all. So without further ado, let's get into the video. If you've never been to Bendigo, you might be surprised to find the tram tracks running directly along the main street. Unfortunately, you might also be a little disappointed to find out that this tram line no longer forms a passenger service. Instead, it is operated as the Bendigo Talking Tram, a heritage tourist service that runs along the remaining section of what was once a real form of public transport, traveling from North Bendigo to Violet Street south of the CBD. Bendigo was one of the last cities in Australia to remove its trams. Even after the days of Sydney's trams were long gone, after Brisbane's had closed and Perth's were basically ancient history, the Bendigo tramways still trundled on. This couldn't last forever, however, and finally the order was given to close the city's two tram lines by 1972. The north to south corridor from Eaglehawk to Quarry Hill was fully dismantled. However, unlike most other cities, the majority of the track for the east-west line remained in place, save for the western section to Golden Square, which was shortened. The government had closed the line with the intention of turning it into a tourist service, which began operation shortly after and continues to this day. Currently, Bendigo's public transport exists in the form of slow, unreliable, and infrequent buses. This creates a dependency on these buses, which leads to most people choosing the car. You'd be surprised at how bad traffic can get in a city of just 100,000 people. Since we already have the track, it wouldn't be that expensive to return the trams that Bendigo once had. Times have changed since the 1970s. Public transport ridership is on the rise, and other cities around the country have been busy returning their trams, such as Sydney, Canberra, and even Newcastle. One immediate objection that many are quick to bring up is that Bendigo is too small for trams, that a city of only 100,000 people simply cannot sustain a tram network. This argument is already quite silly because, well, Bendigo had trams. In fact, it had them longer than most other cities in Australia, but there are many examples of similarly sized cities retaining networks of even greater sizes than the one Bendigo had. Innsbruck, Olomouc, Osijek, all examples of small cities with populations of roughly 100,000, managing to sustain decently sized networks. You probably haven't even heard of most of these. Even the city of Görlitz, Germany, with a population of only 56,000, is still able to operate a network of two tram lines. And hey, if Görlitz can do it, why not Bendigo? One thing is clear, however, and it's the fact that the current length of track and state of track of the Bendigo tram line simply isn't good enough to provide a proper transit service. In 2008, a trial was run using two Z-Class trams from Melbourne, in order to test the viability of returning trams to public transport service in Bendigo. This trial didn't receive much patronage. This was likely due to a few factors. The 20-minute frequencies weren't that much of an improvement over the existing tourist service. The Z-Class trams that were being used were over 30 years old at this point and didn't really feel new or exciting. There were no upgrades that were made to existing infrastructure to indicate any plans for a long-term commitment to this trial. In addition, the trams only ran during the morning and afternoon peak on weekdays, meaning that there was a very limited amount of time that people could actually use this service. Many people continue to point to such a trial as proof that trams will never work in Bendigo. However, in my opinion, this trial simply indicates that there are many required improvements that would have to be made before we can get a service running again. The current line is mostly single track, and lacks an important extension to Golden Square that was present in the original line but was removed when the trams closed in 1972. The single track sections cause potential for delays and severely limit frequency. With one of the tracks already here, however, it wouldn't be too difficult to add a second. It would also be important to restore the former line to Golden Square, and potentially even a further extension to the suburb of Kangaroo Flat, as there is a lot of development towards the south these days. An extension to Golden Square would bring the line length to a total of 5 kilometers, and an even further extension to Kangaroo Flat would bring it to 8 kilometers. However, one thing that I believe is the most important connection is a branch towards Bendigo Station. The utility of the trams would be greatly increased if such a vital transport connection was to be provided. Many people make the hour-and-a-half commute from Bendigo to Melbourne to work, and while the number of people who do this is lower than in Geelong and Ballarat, there is still a significant demand for it. The current station is surrounded by a big car park, and there is plenty of space to construct a new tram terminus. In the future, we could even talk about restoring the second line, which originally followed from Eaglehawk to Quarry Hill. However, this would likely be much more difficult, as it will require rebuilding infrastructure from scratch. Currently, Melbourne is receiving a new fleet of medium-capacity G-class trams, and a fleet of trams like this would be perfect for a return to tram service here in Bendigo. So what do you think? Does the prospect of returning tram service in Bendigo sound like a good idea, or is it still a little bit far-fetched? There is one thing that I think I can say with confidence though, and it's the fact that it would be possible for a tram service to work in this Victorian city. It really is simply a question of political will and how much funding would need to be allocated for such a project to come to fruition. And with that said, thank you so much for watching this video. Remember to like and also subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. Thank you so much to all of my channel members for supporting my channel and what I do. And finally, I will see you in the next one.